The year is 1959. Dust chokes the air, thick with the metallic tang of ancient stone. Zeneim stands at the threshold of the newly unearthed pyramid, his eyes fixed on the dark maw of the entrance. Without warning, the ground buckles. A massive slab of limestone dislodges from the ceiling with a roar that vibrates through the floor. It crashes down, shattering the rock inches from a worker's feet. Chaos erupts instantly. Men drop their shovels, scrambling over debris to reach the daylight. They scream about the pharaoh's curse, their voices shrill and frantic. Zeneim does not run. He stands motionless as the dust cloud settles around him, his grip tightening on his flashlight until his knuckles turn white. The silence that follows the stampede is heavy, pressing against his chest. He listens to the fading echoes of his team, then turns his back on the light. He marches into the darkness alone, the beam of his light cutting a sharp, lonely path through the suffocating gloom. The corridor ahead narrowed, the walls lined with brittle, decaying papyrus that crumbled at the slightest vibration. Zeneim moved with a steady, rhythmic gait, his flashlight beam dancing over the uneven floor. He reached the queen's chamber. The air here felt different, colder, carrying a faint scent of ozone. He stepped inside. The walls shimmered, inlaid with lapis lazuli and gold leaf. In the center, the sarcophagus waited. Its lid sat slightly askew, a jagged gap inviting him in. He wedged his crowbar into the seam. The metal screeched against stone, a high-pitched wail that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. With a final, violent heave, the lid slid aside and crashed to the floor. Zeneim leaned over the edge, his heart hammering against his ribs. He shone his light into the hollow space. It was empty. No linen wrappings, no remains, just a fine layer of gray dust. He stood back, confused, his breath hitching in the stagnant air. Then, his light caught a movement in the corner. A figure stood there, carved from a pale, translucent stone. The lips were painted with a thin layer of gold, curved into a knowing, deliberate smile. Zeneim reached out, his fingers tracing the cold, smooth cheek of the figure. Zeneim did not leave the pyramid that night. When he finally emerged, the sun was already high, but he did not look at the light. He returned the next day, and the day after that. The Department of Antiquities became a distant memory. He stopped eating. He stopped attending meetings. His colleagues found him sitting in his office for hours, staring at photographs of the statue, his fingers tracing the paper until the edges frayed. He whispered to the empty air, his voice a dry rasp that barely carried across the room. When they questioned him, he did not look at them. His eyes were bloodshot, sunken deep into his skull, hollowed out by a hunger that had nothing to do with food. "She is waiting," he told them. "She is more real than any of you." He began to spend his entire salary on transport to the site, ignoring the mounting pile of unpaid bills on his desk. By the end of the week, he was seen pacing the banks of the Nile at midnight. He stood at the water's edge, shouting names into the dark. On a Tuesday morning, the office door stood ajar. Inside, the air was stale. His desk was buried under a thick stack of sketches, each one depicting the statue with a precision that bordered on the impossible. The lines were sharp, the shading deep, and the smile on the paper seemed to shift depending on the angle of the light. There was no sign of Zeneim. His colleagues moved through the room, their footsteps muffled by the scattered papers. They found nothing else. By noon, the search moved to the river. On the edge of the bank, a single coat lay neatly folded. His shoes were placed side by side, toes pointing toward the water, as if he had stepped out of them and simply vanished. The police arrived within the hour. They dragged the river for 3 days, but the current was too strong. The case was closed as a suicide. But the river kept its secrets, and the office remained empty, save for the sketches. The official report listed a suicide, but the workers who had first breached the tomb told a different story. Weeks after the site was abandoned, they returned to seal the chamber permanently. They pushed against the heavy stone door and stepped into the dark. The air was still, but the room felt wrong. They turned their lamps toward the corner where the statue had stood. The corner was empty. The pale, translucent figure was gone. They swung their beams toward the center of the room. The statue stood directly in front of the sarcophagus. The light caught the figure, revealing a change. The thin, knowing smile had widened. It was sharper now, with a deliberate, predatory intent. The statue remains, waiting in the silence.